Caroline Sebastin had built an empire with her own hands, but on that particular Tuesday morning, she would learn that the greatest test of leadership isn't creating success. It's deciding what to do when you witness failure in those who represent you. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story makes you believe that nothing is impossible if only you believe. Now, let's get back to the story. The soft hum of air conditioners filled Premier Financial Services' flagship branch that Tuesday morning. Customers stood in line, scrolling through their phones, glancing occasionally at the marble floors that reflected the sleek ceiling lights. It was just another controlled professional California morning until the glass doors slid open and an elderly black woman stepped inside. She looked decidedly out of place, not just older than most visitors, but worn in a way that spoke of years outside these polished walls. Her faded floral dress, once beloved but long ago stained with the remnants of a difficult life, hung softly on her frame. Her orthopedic shoes were scuffed and uneven, the sole on her left foot visibly more worn than the right. Her silver hair, partially covered with a simple head wrap, hadn't seen careful hands in what seemed like weeks. And the leather purse she carried, faded, creased with age, held like a sacred object, spoke of better days and persistent hope. Every head turned, but not in recognition. In assessment. In judgment. Ella, stationed at the customer service desk nearest to the entrance, narrowed her eyes almost imperceptibly. Her colleague Margaret leaned in close, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. Who let her in here? Should security have stopped her? Susan, arranging papers at an adjacent desk, looked up and smirked. Maybe she's lost looking for the social services office next door, she said, just loud enough for nearby customers to hear a ripple of poorly concealed laughter. In his corner office, branch manager Sylvester didn't notice any of this, too absorbed in quarterly reports and his own insecurities about whether he truly deserved his position. If you stand against disrespect and gatekeeping, hit subscribe right now. People who enjoy humiliating others can keep scrolling. Comment, dignity for all. The elderly woman, Caroline, stood quietly for a moment, taking in the space with eyes that carried both gentleness and a particular kind of clarity. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but distinct. Good morning. I'd like to speak with the branch manager about a matter. I have an account here, and I need assistance. Ella's fingers continued typing without pause. Do you have your account number with you? She asked, the question carrying an undertone that suggested the old woman's presence itself was unlikely and problematic. Margaret didn't bother hiding a smile. Or perhaps you're here to inquire about our financial literacy programs. We do offer basic banking education for those who are new to managing accounts. The laughter that followed was swift and cruel, spreading like a contagion across the floor. Other customers began murmuring, some shaking their heads with practiced disapproval, others smirking as if they, too, understood the unspoken code of who belonged in this space and who didn't. Caroline didn't falter, but she moved forward with quiet intention. I would simply like to speak with the manager, she said again, her tone unchanged. Directly, please. Susan stood up abruptly, her young face hardened with dismissive authority. Ma, look at yourself. You can barely stand properly. This is one of the most prestigious banks in California, not a place for. She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Please, I just need to speak with the manager, Caroline repeated, and this time there was something different in her voice, something that made Susan pause for just a fraction of a second. Something solid. Something accustomed to being heard. But that moment passed quickly, and Susan's confidence surged back. She gestured to a security guard, a tall muscular man stationed near the entrance. Kindly show this woman outside, Susan said, her voice now dripping with false politeness. Gently but firmly. We have clients to serve. The security guard hesitated. Something in the old woman's presence gave him pause, but orders were orders. He approached her carefully, extending his arm. "Ma, please come with me. You'll have to step outside." Caroline didn't resist. She moved toward the door with dignity and tact, but as the security guard gently guided her through the glass doors and into the bright California sun, she stumbled slightly on the threshold. Her worn leather purse clutched tighter to her chest. She steadied herself. Behind the transparent glass walls, she could see them. Ella, Margaret, Susan, and the watching customers, all of them observing her exit like spectators at a predetermined show. Some shook their heads in mock sympathy. Others actually laughed. Don't side with public shaming. Like this video if you're against bullying in plain sight, and subscribe if you believe status isn't a license to be cruel. Comment respect is non-negotiable. Outside on the sun-heated pavement, Caroline stood for a moment, not in shame but in something deeper, disappointment. She reached slowly into her worn purse with a trembling hand and withdrew something that couldn't possibly match her appearance. A brand new iPhone 15 Pro Max, its silver body gleaming against the harsh California sunlight. She tapped the screen with the ease of someone very familiar with technology, and when she dialed, her voice transformed entirely. All softness vanished. All patience evaporated. "Sylvester," she said, cold and clipped. "I'm outside your branch right now. Come down." Immediately. On the other end, Sylvester's relaxed expression transformed into panic as soon as he heard the voice. He recognized it instantly. His hand trembled as he jumped from his chair, nearly knocking over his coffee. "Madame Sebastian? Where are you? Are you here?" "Outside," Caroline said simply, and she hung up. Within 10 minutes, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the front of the branch. Sylvester practically ran out, his shirt already showing patches of sweat beneath the arms. He rushed back inside, and immediately the entire floor shifted. Staff who had been relaxed suddenly became tense. Those who had been laughing became focused. Those who had been dismissive became nervous. Ella, Margaret, and Susan exchanged quick glances, their expressions shifting from smug to uncertain. Why is Sylvester running around like something's wrong? Margaret whispered to Ella, "Did you hear what he said on the phone?" Ella shook her head, but her voice had dropped. "Something about Madam. Something. I couldn't catch it all." The glass doors slid open again, and the same elderly woman stepped back inside. But now her posture was different. Her head held high, her steps deliberate and controlled. She walked directly to the center of the banking hall. Sylvester was directly behind her, his face the color of old paper. Ella's mouth fell open. Margaret stood frozen. Susan's hand dropped the papers she'd been holding, and when Sylvester's voice came out, it trembled. "Staff, this is Madame Caroline Sebastian. She is the founder of Premier Financial Services. She is the architect of everything you see here." The entire banking hall fell into complete silence. Caroline's voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of decades of building something from nothing. "I stood in this bank for approximately 15 minutes this morning. In that entire time, not a single one of you treated me with basic human respect. You mocked me. You humiliated me. You threw me out." She turned to each person deliberately. "Ella, Margaret, Susan, hand over your identification cards. As of this moment, your employment with Premier Financial Services is terminated. Effective immediately." Ella dropped to her knees, tears already streaming. "Please, Ma, please, we didn't know. We didn't understand." Margaret's entire body shook. "Ma, please, we're sorry. We're so sorry." But Caroline simply looked at each of them with eyes full of disappointment rather than anger, turned, and walked toward the exit. The staff watched in silent horror as she left, the weight of their actions finally, devastatingly, real. It had been 3 weeks since that morning, But Caroline Sebastin still couldn't stop thinking about the faces of those three young women. She sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Ikoyi home, watching the California evening settle into gold and deep orange. Her tea had gone cold hours ago. The sunset painted the sky in colors that would have been beautiful on any other evening, but tonight it only reminded her of the very thing she was trying not to think about. Had she been too harsh? Caroline sat in her study, surrounded by the soft leather of furniture that had seen decades of her struggles and triumphs, and she allowed herself to remember the faces of those three young women as fear had washed over them like a flood. Ella had been the first to break, her body folding in on itself as if she could make herself disappear through sheer force of will. Margaret had trembled visibly, her professional composure shattering like glass. And Susan, prideful, dismissive Susan, had turned a shade of pale that suggested all the blood in her body was abandoning her at once. But had witnessing their fear satisfied her? Had it taught them anything, or had it simply been cruelty dressed up in the language of consequence? She picked up her phone and scrolled through the messages from Sylvester. 6 of them, each more desperate than the last. She didn't read them fully. She already knew what they said: apologies, desperate explanations, pleas for forgiveness, suggestions that the three women were young and had made a mistake and surely deserved another opportunity. As if she had asked for them to be fired in anger. As if she hadn't planned every word, every moment of that confrontation with the precision of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the high back of her chair. This was the weight of power, she thought. The ability to destroy someone's livelihood in a single afternoon, and the subsequent knowledge that you had done so. It didn't matter if they deserved it. That wasn't the question. The question was whether destroying them had been the right choice, or merely the easiest one. 3 weeks had passed since that morning. 3 weeks of Caroline sitting in meetings, reviewing financial reports, and making decisions that moved millions of naira across continents, all while her mind circled back to those three women like a bird unable to find its nest. She had thought that time would dull the memory, that her initial sense of justified anger would crystallize into certainty. Instead, she found herself questioning. And she hated questioning. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Caroline did something she rarely did anymore. She called Sylvester directly. He answered on the first ring. He'd been waiting, she could tell. His voice was cautious, careful, like someone approaching a wild animal that might strike at any moment. I want to see them, Caroline said without preamble. Ella, Margaret, and Susan. I'm coming to the branch tomorrow at 10 in the morning. I want them here in my office, along with their personnel files. There was a pause. Madame Sebastin, they're no longer employed with us. As you instructed. I know what I instructed, Caroline interrupted, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Call them. Tell them to come to the branch at 10. Tell them I'm giving them an opportunity to explain themselves. That's all you need to tell them. She hung up before he could ask further questions. The next morning, Caroline arrived at the branch precisely at 9:50. The staff scattered like startled birds at the sight of her, and she noticed with grim satisfaction that they were all on their best behavior now. Professionalism had become a mask they couldn't afford to drop. She wondered how many of them wore it because they believed in it, and how many wore it simply because they feared her. At exactly 10 o'clock, the three women arrived. They had clearly been told something, but their faces suggested they had no idea what to expect. Ella was dressed carefully, as if she had selected each piece of clothing as armor against whatever judgment awaited her. Margaret's eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting recent tears. Susan held herself stiffly, her jaw clenched with a combination of anger and fear. Caroline stood as they entered her office, the corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking California skyline, the office that represented the culmination of decades of work. She gestured to the 3 chairs positioned in front of her desk. "Sit, please," she said, and her voice was neither warm nor cold but simply clear. They sat in silence, and the weight of that silence was extraordinary. Caroline settled herself back into her chair, her hands folded carefully on the desk in front of her. "I have been thinking about what happened," she began, her words deliberate and measured. "I have been thinking about how I handled it. And I have come to realize that while your behavior was unacceptable, my response may have been incomplete." Ella's head lifted slightly, hope flickering across her face before she seemed to remember herself and look back down. "I am not here to apologize for holding you accountable for your actions," Caroline continued. "You disrespected someone, me, and that someone happened to be the founder of this institution. But more importantly, you disrespected a human being who had done nothing to deserve contempt." She paused, letting that settle. "However, I am wondering if immediate termination was the most useful response. Not because you don't deserve consequences, but because I wonder if you understand why I'm angry. And I wonder if you have the capacity to learn from this, or if the fear of consequence is all you're feeling." Margaret's tears began flowing freely now, silent streams running down her cheeks. Caroline reached into a drawer in her desk and withdrew 3 sealed envelopes. She held them up. "Inside each of these are letters," she said. "These letters describe exactly what I observed from you that morning. They describe how your words made me feel, and they describe the precise moment when your behavior moved from rudeness into something darker. I want you to take these letters home. I want you to read them carefully. And I want each of you to write me a response letter. Not an apology, though I suspect you may apologize anyway, but rather an explanation of why you behaved as you did, and your philosophy about how all people should be treated, regardless of their appearance or their apparent economic status." She slid 1 envelope across the desk to each woman. "You have 1 week. After that, we'll talk about what comes next. You are dismissed from these positions. That much remains true. But the final chapter of this story has not been written yet." The 3 women stood, each holding her envelope as if it might burn. Ella was the first to speak, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Thank you for giving us this chance." Caroline simply nodded and watched them leave, each of them clutching the envelope that held their reckoning, and carrying with them the possibility of redemption. The envelope sat on Ella's kitchen table like an accusation. She hadn't opened it immediately. Instead, she had stared at it for hours, the cream-colored paper seeming to pulse with weight that no object should possibly possess. When she finally broke the seal with trembling fingers, she read Caroline's words once, then again, then a 3rd time, each reading making the knot in her stomach tighter. The letter was precise in its cruelty. Not malicious cruelty, but the kind that came from truth. Caroline had written about the exact moment when Ella had suggested she might be lost or had come to beg. And as Ella read those words written back to her, she felt something crack open inside herself. That night, Ella couldn't sleep. She lay in her small bedroom in her parents' house, staring at the ceiling, and her mind moved backward through time like film rewinding. She remembered her mother coming home from cleaning jobs, her hands red and cracked from bleach and hot water, her stories of customers who treated her as though she were invisible. People who spoke about her while she was in the room as if her presence didn't register. Ella had hated those stories, hated the way her mother seemed to shrink when recounting them, hated the world for making her mother feel small. And yet, today, just weeks ago, she had become exactly what she had despised. She had looked at an elderly woman and decided she was less. She had made her feel small. Near midnight, Ella got out of bed and sat at the small desk in her room. She pulled out paper and pen, and she began to write. The tears came almost immediately, falling onto the page and smudging her words, but she didn't stop. She wrote about her mother's 30 years of work, about the dismissive looks her mother had endured, about the shame she felt in recognizing herself in those dismissers. She wrote, "I have become the kind of person you taught me to despise, and I don't know how to forgive myself for that. But I know that going forward, I will never again treat any person as less than human, regardless of what they wear or how they look or what I assume about them. Every person deserves dignity, because every person is someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's loved one." She signed the letter as dawn broke outside her window, and she sat there exhausted, finally understanding what she had done. Margaret's journey began differently. She was at her second job, a restaurant where she worked weekends, when she finally opened Caroline's letter during her break. Her initial reaction was anger. She crumpled it in her fist, her jaw clenching as she thought about how unfair it all was. Caroline was a billionaire, she thought bitterly. Of course she could afford to be righteous. Of course she could afford to judge. Margaret was struggling, working 2 jobs to pay for her apartment and her university fees, and this woman had destroyed her career over a moment of mockery. It wasn't fair. But later that evening, sitting with her closest friend Zainab over tea, something shifted. Zainab asked her to read the letter aloud, and as Margaret did, she heard something she had missed in her anger. Caroline had mentioned a specific moment, when Margaret had imitated a dismissive laugh that she'd heard from a senior staff member. As she read those words, Margaret remembered that exact moment, remembered how she had simply copied the laugh without thinking about why she was doing it. She had been absorbing the toxicity of the workplace the way a sponge absorbs water, becoming someone she didn't actually want to be, all without even realizing it was happening. "That's not who you are," Zainab said quietly, watching Margaret's face as understanding dawned. "No," Margaret agreed, her voice small. "It's not." She spent the next few days thinking about intentionality, about how many times she had done things without truly considering why she was doing them or what impact they might have. She thought about the customer she had been cruel to before Caroline, and the one before that, and she realized she had been moving through her life like a passenger, reacting to the environment around her rather than choosing who she wanted to be. When she finally sat down to write her letter, the words came slowly but honestly. She wrote about how she had been copying behavior without understanding, how she had never actually considered the impact of her words on the person receiving them. She wrote, "I am committing to a new philosophy of intentionality, that every interaction with another human being deserves my genuine attention and respect. I will no longer mindlessly repeat the attitudes I observe around me. I will choose who I want to be, and I choose to be someone kind." Susan's struggle was the most visible and the most painful. When she opened Caroline's letter, her first instinct was to laugh at it, to dismiss it as the complaints of an overly sensitive old woman who didn't understand the pressures young people faced. She was drowning in debt from university. Her relationship had recently imploded, and her father's health was deteriorating. She was barely holding it together, and Caroline wanted to lecture her about respect? The unfairness of it burned. But 3 days into her anger, something her mother said cut through her defensiveness like a blade. Her mother had asked gently, "Susan, do you think that woman was having a good day? Do you think maybe she had her own struggles?" And suddenly, Susan saw the connection she had been avoiding. She had been projecting all of her pain, all of her frustration, all of her fear onto this woman she perceived as weaker, as more vulnerable, as someone who couldn't fight back. She had found an outlet for her darkness in someone else's suffering. That realization was devastating. She called her best friend and confessed what she was thinking, and her friend didn't contradict her or offer easy comfort. Instead, she simply said, "So what are you going to do about it?" Susan's letter took longer to write than the others. She rewrote it 5 times, each draft getting closer to the truth she needed to say. In the final version, she wrote about her struggles, the financial stress, the family problems, the heartbreak, and then she wrote, "But none of my struggles justify how I treated you or anyone else. I was using someone else's perceived weakness as an outlet for my own pain, and that is something I am ashamed of. I am committing to a philosophy of accountability. That no matter what I face, I am responsible for my actions and my words, and I will not inflict my pain on innocent people. I will address my own issues rather than pretending they give me permission to hurt others. The week passed, and on the designated day, all three women arrived at the bank with their letters. They moved through the building quietly, aware now of how their presence was perceived, how the remaining staff watched them with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been respect. They placed their sealed envelopes on Sylvester's desk with instructions to give them to Caroline, and as they left the building, each of them carried something new. Not hope exactly, but possibility. They had reckoned with themselves, and they had survived it. Whatever came next, they had already transformed in the ways that mattered most. Caroline sat in her office on a quiet Friday morning, sunlight streaming through the windows and casting long shadows across her desk. 3 letters lay before her, arranged in a careful line, and she had been reading them for over an hour. Her tea had gone cold beside her, forgotten in favor of words that demanded her complete attention. Ella's letter had made her think of her own daughter, and she had paused midway through to sit with that thought. Margaret's letter had shown her something unexpected. Not desperation, but genuine insight about the nature of accountability. And Susan's letter, with its raw honesty about pain and projection, had moved her more deeply than she wanted to admit. These weren't apologies crafted to minimize damage or excuses designed to shift blame. These were letters of true reckoning, written by young women who had looked at themselves and seen something they didn't like, and had chosen to change it anyway. That kind of honesty was rare, and Caroline recognized it immediately because she had built her empire on it. The willingness to see truth, however uncomfortable, and respond to it with integrity. On Monday morning, Caroline called an emergency meeting with her senior leadership team. The conference room filled with executives accustomed to financial discussions and strategic planning, and they settled into their chairs with the confidence of people whose positions were secure. Caroline began by telling them the story. Not just what had happened at the branch, but why it mattered. She spoke about the 3 young women, about their behavior and her initial response, and about the letters they had written. She spoke about leadership and the difference between punishment that destroys and consequences that transform. I am announcing today, she said, her voice steady and clear, that instead of permanently terminating Ella, Margaret, and Susan, Premier Financial Services will be implementing a specialized mentorship program for these 3 women, effective immediately. This program will focus on ethical leadership, dignity in customer service, and understanding the true values of this institution. The purpose is not punishment. They have already experienced consequence. The purpose is transformation. She paused, letting her gaze move around the table. And I believe they are capable of it. 3 years later, Caroline stood in the ballroom of the Premium Hotels, watching the annual Premier Financial Services Gala unfold beneath crystal chandeliers and soft golden lighting. The room was filled with executives, investors, clients, and employees, the entire ecosystem of the bank she had built. She sat at the head table, and as the evening progressed through speeches and presentations, she felt the particular satisfaction that came from watching things unfold as they should. Ella had become the customer service manager at the branch, and her transformation was visible in every interaction she had. She approached clients with genuine warmth, and there was a quality to her attention that made people feel truly seen. She had implemented new training protocols that emphasized dignity and authentic respect, and word had spread through the banking community about the exceptional service at Premier's flagship branch. Margaret had moved into business development, where her commitment to intentional interactions had made her exceptional at building long-term client relationships. She didn't rush sales pitches or rely on manipulation. Instead, she listened genuinely to what clients needed and helped them find authentic solutions. Her client retention rate was among the highest in the company. Susan's journey had been more visibly marked by struggle and growth. She had enrolled in the bank's leadership development program, addressing not just her professional skills but her personal challenges as well. She had become someone who mentored younger staff members facing similar pressures, helping them find healthier ways to manage their stress and frustrations. She was on track for a management position within the year. When Sylvester took the stage to announce the annual awards, his voice carried a different quality than it had 3 years ago. More confident, more genuine. "This year," he said, "we are honoring 3 individuals who exemplify not just excellence in their roles, but excellence in character. I am pleased to present the Ambassadors of Excellence Awards to Ella Jones, Margaret Chen, and Susan Phillips." If you refuse to let toxic culture win, smash subscribe and drop a like. Only gatekeepers will stay quiet right now. Comment growth over ego. The 3 women walked to the stage to tremendous applause. Caroline watched them climb the steps, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but recognition. Recognition that she had made the right choice when she decided to offer them a path forward instead of simply closing a door. Ella spoke first, and when she began talking about her mother and what it means to treat every person as someone's family, there were tears in the audience. She talked about the moment she understood that the elderly woman who had come to the bank was as worthy of respect and dignity as any powerful businessman, and that this realization had changed her understanding of herself. "I learned that dignity isn't something we grant to people we deem worthy," she said. "It's something we offer to all people, because they are people." Margaret spoke about intentionality, about how easy it is to move through life reacting to the environment around you, absorbing toxicity and spreading it forward without even realizing what you're doing. She talked about making the deliberate choice to be someone different, someone more conscious, someone more thoughtful. "Every interaction matters," she said. "And we get to choose what kind of person we are in those interactions, if we're willing to be deliberate about it." Susan's words were quieter but no less powerful. She spoke about the power of being given a second chance, and about how that second chance had forced her to confront not just her behavior at work, but her entire way of relating to the world. She spoke about accountability, not as punishment but as the pathway to becoming who you actually want to be. "I was at my breaking point 3 years ago," she said, "and instead of finishing me off, I was given the chance to break open in a different way, the way that leads to growth." When Sylvester returned to the microphone to close the evening, he announced something new. "Premier Financial Services is implementing the Dignity Protocol," he said. "A comprehensive company-wide initiative that ensures every staff member, at every level, understands that respect and genuine care for all clients is non-negotiable. This protocol will guide every interaction, every decision, and every training session we conduct going forward." The applause was thunderous, and Caroline understood that something larger had shifted. That this moment, and these 3 women, had sparked a change that would ripple through the organization and beyond. After the gala ended and the ballroom had emptied, Caroline met privately with each of the 3 women. She congratulated them genuinely, and they spoke about their futures, about the opportunities opening before them, about the people they had become. She told Ella she was considering her for a position in the bank's ethics and culture division. She told Margaret she had been invited to speak at an international banking conference about authentic client relationships. She told Susan that her mentorship work had not gone unnoticed, and that she was being considered for a regional leadership role. As the final woman left her office and Caroline stood alone looking out at the California skyline, she reflected on what leadership truly meant. It wasn't about catching people failing, she thought. It wasn't about the power to destroy or the satisfaction of watching consequences fall. Real leadership was about creating the conditions for transformation, about recognizing potential even in people who had disappointed you, about understanding that everyone deserves the chance to become better than their worst moment. The 3 young women downstairs had seized that chance, and in doing so they had taught her something too, that mercy combined with accountability creates something powerful. It creates the possibility of genuine human growth and a workplace and ultimately a world built on dignity rather than fear.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.